Okay, good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to the Alliance Française of Lake Champlain Region Pause-Midi talk. Our speakers today are two individuals who have spent a lot of time interested in and learning about the visit of the Marquis de Lafayette in the 1820s, his farewell tour of the United States, Alan Hoffman and Peter Riley. And Alan is going to talk first, and then he will be followed by Peter, and we will proceed accordingly. So let me share Alan's slides, and it is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and thank you for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm going to be talking about the farewell tour in general throughout the 24 states Lafayette visited, and Peter will be focusing on his visit to Vermont, which was the 24th of the states that he visited. First slide, please, Eric.
Okay. Okay.
Next slide, yeah. In 1846, a New York printer called Ensons and Thayer published a colored broadside titled The Pictorial History of the United States. In addition to depicting the seals of each of the states and and the territories at the time, and printed information about the discovery, the battles of the American Revolution, and the War of 1812, population statistics from 1790 and 1840, and a list of distinguished men. The print contains three images, three major figures below the title, Pictorial History of the United States. Washington in the middle, Franklin to his left, and Lafayette on his good right hand. Not Jefferson or Madison or Adams or Hamilton or even Jackson, who was quite popular at the time, but a Frenchman, Lafayette. Why was that? I'm going to try to answer that in this talk. In the 19th century and into the 20th century, Lafayette's reputation in America was extraordinary. He was already popular before his arrival in 1824. He was popular by virtue of his important role in the American Revolution, his subsequent activities on behalf of his adoptive land, America, his close friendship with George Washington, and his storybook life. However, this trip, during which he toured each of the 24 states and was treated as a conquering hero, reaffirmed his reputation and elevated him into iconic status in America. The best analogies that I could think of, and I certainly didn't invent them, was the excitement caused by the visit of the Beatles in the 1960s among teenagers, or the 1979 visit of John Paul II. The result was that Lafayette's name was firmly imprinted on the American psyche. When state banks printed legal tender, Lafayette's face appeared on bills in more states than any other person except Washington. Scores of cities, counties, towns, and townships, approximately 80 in number, were named for Lafayette. They take six forms: Lafayette, Fayette, Fayetteville, Lafayetteville, or LaGrange. Now, LaGrange, on the next slide, is an image of the Chateau Lagrange. It's the way they say it in France. Was where Lafayette lived. It came down in his wife's family from 1799 to 1824. And there's even one LaGrangeville. New York State has all six of the forms of Lafayette namings. There are countless streets, squares, and parks named for Lafayette. The city of Boston has 8 streets with one of those names, and the city of New York, the 5 boroughs, have 12. Numerous statues and monuments were built honoring Lafayette in this country. My favorite is the next slide, Daniel Chester French's Lafayette Monument in Prospect Park, Brooklyn. It was dedicated during World War I in 1917. And then after France gave America the Statue of Liberty, America reciprocated. An equestrian statue of Lafayette by Paul Wayland Bartlett, who was an American expatriate, was given to France in 1908. It was called the Children's Statue because it was paid for by coins collected by thousands of America's school children. It stood outside the Louvre until the I.M. Pei Pyramid was constructed, you know, the one we saw in the movie The Da Vinci Code, which event caused its removal to a less conspicuous spot on the right bank of the Seine. The next slide is the children's statue, very impressive statue. There's an exact copy in Hartford, Connecticut, behind the State House, except the pedestal is not quite so high. And when it was constructed, the rear of the horse was facing the State House, and Governor Ella Grasso decided she didn't like that, so she ordered it turned around. So now Lafayette and his horse are facing the State House. I'll show you one more sculpture. This is Lafayette and Washington clasping hands. It's by Bartholdi, the sculptor of the Statue of Liberty, and it's at the southern tip of Morningside Park in Manhattan, in Lafayette Square, Manhattan. Mount Lafayette was named by the people of Franconia in 1824, Franconia, New Hampshire, and Lafayette College was named as a result of Lafayette's visit in eastern Pennsylvania in 1826. There's a Lake Lafayette in northern Florida and a Lafayette River in southern Virginia. Well, Lafayette decided to return to the United States for one last visit after he received his friend President James Monroe's invitation in early 1824. In July, he departed for America with his son, who was named George Washington Lafayette after his mentor and friend, Auguste Levasseur, his private secretary, who kept a journal of the trip, and a valet aboard the Cadmus, which was an American packet ship. This trip, the farewell tour, was a unique event in our history, if not the history of the world. You may think that what I just said is hyperbole. However, I am not alone in sharing that opinion. Contemporaries felt that way. In 1830, for example, Edward Everett wrote a review of Levasseur's journal, which is the book that I translated, Lafayette in America in 1824 and 1825. And he, in the review, he praised the book, he praised Lafayette, and he said this about the farewell tour. It was an event taken in all its parts, unparalleled in the history of man. Here is this 67-year-old man, tall but somewhat portly, who walks with a limp and a cane and wears a hairpiece, who has wielded no military power or governmental authority since 1792, when he served as a general on the northern border of France in its defense, who then held no public position, and he's treated like a conquering hero, a Caesar, or an Alexander for 13 months in every corner of a vast country. There are parades, militia reviews, dinners, banquets, balls, meet and greets with school children, the public, and members of private societies. There are dedications of public monuments and buildings, and a plethora of speeches and toasts. Triumphal arches are constructed honoring Lafayette in cities and towns as both. Americans of all races, each gender, and every age wanted to touch this man who had done so much for their country. A whole cottage industry of consumer goods was created around Lafayette's visit. There are Lafayette prints, fans, hats, buttons, bandanas, medallions, sheet music, bottles, brushes, baby shoes, and ribbons. The next slide is a Lafayette ribbon worn by the school children of Boston in 1824 when Lafayette arrived on the Boston Common. There are Lafayette scarves. The next slide is a Lafayette scarf produced with patriotic symbols, Welcome Lafayette, produced in Philadelphia in 1824. There were Staffordshire and other ceramics, including a set of dishes depicting Lafayette's arrival in New York City, and ladies' kid gloves and men's kid gloves, for that matter, with his face imprinted on them. Here you see two examples. The one on the right, he's paired with Washington. Numerous American painters wanted to, and many did, paint him from life. The two most important paintings are this one, Samuel F. B. Morse. It was commissioned by the city of New York. It's in the city council chamber to this day, and it depicts, as Morse wrote in a letter, Lafayette contemplating the bust of Washington and Franklin, and an empty pedestal waiting for his bust. And the next slide is the Philadelphia painter, Thomas Sully. That's his Lafayette. He's standing outside Independence Hall. If you wanted, I like to say that if you know Thomas Sully, if you wanted to get your image painted in the most favorable way for your posterity, you hired Sully, not Morse. On August 15th, 1824, the Cadmus arrived in New York Bay. As Levasseur contemplated Staten, that's the Cadmus, the next slide. The only known image of the Cadmus, it's in the Penobscot, Maine Maritime Museum. As Levasseur contemplated Staten Island to his left, quote, the noise of a cannon caught my attention from another side. It was the artillery of Fort Lafayette, which was announcing the arrival of the Cadmus to the city of New York. The next slide is a 19th century painting of the Narrows, that portion between lower New York Bay and upper New York Bay, and that square structure is Fort Lafayette. I lived about 12 blocks from where that structure used to be. It was blown up in 1960 to make way for one of the eastern stanchions of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Because it was a Sunday, Lafayette disembarked in Staten Island and stayed at the home of the then Vice President, Daniel Tompkins. On the following day, he arrived in Castle Garden at the southern tip of Manhattan on a steamship, accompanied by a numerous flotilla of boats, and was welcomed by all the civilian and military authorities of the city of New York, and according to Levasseur, a crowd of 200,000 people. That's a little high. There are other estimates in newspaper accounts that go from 50 to 100,000, but that's Castle Garden. It also was like Fort Lafayette, was in the water, and I'll show you Castle Garden today. Next slide, please. It is now part of Battery Park, and that's due to all the land fillings that took place in the 19th century. Having been feted in New York City, Lafayette headed for Boston as soon as he could on August 20th, 1824, on the Old Post Road. After stopping in several cities in Connecticut and in Providence, Rhode Island, he arrived in Roxbury, a near suburb at the time, in the wee hours of the 24th. On the morning of the 24th, he headed to Boston from the Shirley Eustis House, the governor's mansion in Roxbury, which still exists. It's a wonderful place to visit. They have a Lafayette room, in a procession of 70,000. That's from a newspaper account. He crossed the Boston Common to the State House, where he was addressed by the governor and replied. He then met with all the dignitaries in the State House and was escorted after that to apartments that the city alderman had prepared for him, sparing no expense. I like to tell the story of this apartment because it illustrates what cities and towns did to make sure Lafayette was comfortable and to honor him. The backstory of these apartments is told in a beautiful exhibition catalog called Rather Elegant Than Showy, The Classical Furniture of Isaac Vaux. This exhibition took place at the Mass Historical Society about 5 years ago. To summarize, the alderman rented a portion of the Amory House, which is catty corner from the Massachusetts State House, and gorgeously furnished it. As the authors write, the city of Boston hired only the most respected craftsmen for the furnishings, Vaux and Sons for furniture and lighting, and Hedges for upholstery, draperies, and carpeting. Consistent with this high standard, they selected the city's leading gilder and looking glass maker, John Doggett. The Vaux furniture consisted of 78 items, including this beautiful rosewood couch, which was the feature item in the exhibition at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Mr. Doggett, the gilder, also provided 5 Gilbert Stuart paintings to hang on the walls of this apartment, one for each president, so that Lafayette could be with his friends during his stay in Boston. Moreover, they hired a barouche with 4 white horses for Lafayette's use. On the afternoon of the 24th, there was a dinner at the Exchange Tavern. According to the local press, thereafter, Lafayette visited John Hancock's widow at her home in the evening. This visit is memorialized in a book of fiction, Louisa May Alcott's Old-Fashioned Girl. While this is a work of fiction, the story has a ring of truth to it, and its veracity is supported by the familial relationship between Alcott's mother, Abby May Alcott, and Madam Hancock, Dorothy Quincy Hancock. They were both Quincy's and related to the then mayor of Boston, Josiah Quincy. In this story, a grandmother describes Lafayette's visit to her grandchildren. Well, by and by, the general, escorted by the mayor, drove up. Dear me, I see him now, a little old man in nankeen trousers and vest, a long blue coat and ruffled shirt, leaning on his cane, for he was lame, and smiling and bowing like a true Frenchman. As he approached, the three old ladies rose and curtsied with the utmost dignity. Lafayette bowed first to the governor's picture, Governor Hancock's picture, then to the governor's widow, and kissed her hand. That was droll, for on the back of her glove was stamped Lafayette's likeness, and the gallant old gentleman kissed his own face. Now, this glove that you see, it was a glove that was available in Boston, and it actually came down in the Quincy family, and it's owned by the Massachusetts Historical Society. Then Louisa May Alcott continues, some of the young ladies were presented, and as if to escape any further self-salutations, the Marquis kissed the pretty girls on the cheek. Yes, my dears, here is just the spot where the dear old man saluted me. I'm quite as proud of it now as I was then, for he was a brave, good man and helped us in our trouble. While in Boston, Lafayette visited Harvard College twice, first for graduation ceremonies and then for a Phi Beta Kappa dinner, where Edward Everett, then a young Turk philosophy professor, gave the address. On the 29th, he visited John Adams in Quincy, and on the 31st, he headed north, stopping in 7 towns. It was a rainy day. There were receptions for him in each of the 7. Chelsea, Lynn, Marblehead, Salem, Beverly, Ipswich, and Newburyport. Citizens of New Hampshire joined the frenzy surrounding Lafayette's visit on September 1, 1824, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Although Lafayette proved to be a magnet for all Americans, veterans, particularly veterans of the American Revolution, hastened to greet him. September 1 happened to be the day of Franklin Pierce's graduation from Bowdoin College in Maine. As Peter Wallner writes in his biography of New Hampshire's only president, Franklin had been selected to give an honorary oration in Latin, and he wrote his father, General Benjamin Pierce, hoping he would attend the ceremony. Wallner writes, in this he was disappointed, however, as the old general joined other Revolutionary War soldiers at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to honor General Lafayette, who was on his famous tour of the United States. So he dissed his son's college graduation and valedictory address to spend some time with Lafayette. After visiting Portsmouth and returning to Boston, Lafayette headed west to Lexington, Concord, and Worcester on his return to New York City for his second visit there. In Lexington, a banner was hung on an evergreen at the entrance to Lexington Green. This is a slide of the banner. It still exists. You can't tell from this slide, but it's 39 feet long. It is made of cloth and painted with green paint. It is currently actually on exhibit at the Monroe Tavern in Lexington, owned by Lexington Historical Society. They can't exhibit all 39 feet. They have it in about a 5-foot case, so you see about 1/8 of it at a time. After Lafayette's departure from Boston, the aldermen conducted an auction to try to recoup their investment in the furniture they had provided for Lafayette's comfort. Lafayette, during his return to New York City, there was a big ball at Castle Garden, and then he left New York in late September 1824 and headed west through New Jersey to Philadelphia before heading southward. He arrived at Yorktown in time to celebrate Surrender Day on October 19. He reached Monticello on September 4 and spent 10 days with Jefferson and then a few days with Madison at Montpelier. He spent the winter of 1824 in Washington City, the capital, although he made a number of side trips to Virginia, Maryland, and Western Pennsylvania. Although his original intent was to visit only the initial 13 states, he decided by this time to accept the invitations from all the other states which he received. Thus, he left Washington City on February 23rd for his southern and western campaigns. After traversing Virginia and North Carolina, he entered South Carolina. In Columbia, the capital, an incident occurred which encapsulates this man who made no distinctions of race, color, or creed. In several of the southern states, local officials had decided that the enslaved as well as freedmen should be kept away from all the public ceremonies in honor of Lafayette, as the authorities in Columbia likely did. This was because of Lafayette's reputation as an abolitionist. In an autobiographical sketch of a Dr. Maurice Moore, who was a surgeon attached to a militia that came to Columbia with other militias when Lafayette visited on March 11, 1825, the following incident is described. Now, this is after the parade and the militia review, and at a reception in a private home. 2 sentinels with fixed bayonets on their guns were posted at the door to prevent the entrance of intruders. Officers, however, were allowed to enter unquestioned. Here I saw a strange but pleasant incident transpire. An old African, neatly dressed, came to the front door and started in. But the sentinels interposed their bayoneted guns to his entrance. The old man contemptuously pushed them aside, saying, "Shaw, Shaw, see guns afore you was born. Been where they been shot by soldiers too." And without farther opposition from anyone, gained his way. He came straight to the room where the distinguished guest was standing among the crowd and said, "I come to see General Lafayette." Lafayette turned, looked at him, and remarked, "An old acquaintance, don't tell me who it is." The Negro advanced to the Marquis and, bowing, held out his hand and said, "Howdy, Mass Lafayette. How you do, sir? You remember me?" "Yes." "Stop. Don't tell me your name." "Ah, I have it. Pompey, belonging to Colonel Buchanan, the first servant who waited on me when I landed in Georgetown," said he, as he shook warmly the old man's hand. The nobleman called for a glass of champagne with Pompey, which that worthy took with great dignity. Then he put out his hand and said, "Goodbye, Master Lafayette. We're getting old. We'll never meet again. God bless you." They shook hands again. Pompey went out, mounted his pony, and started for his home near Winnsboro, saying he'd come to see General Lafayette. Now he'd done that, he was going home. By the way, those Southern officials were right to be concerned. Lewis Hayden was an enslaved boy in Lexington, Kentucky, when Lafayette arrived in May of 1825. He subsequently escaped and became a leading abolitionist in Boston, and later, after the Civil War, a public official. He tells this story in his memoir. Lafayette was in full march under the town militia escort. I went a mile to meet them and found the fences lined with people. Lafayette was in a barouche drawn by 4 horses, and as he passed the people, he bowed to them on both sides. When he passed me, he bowed to the fence I was on. I looked around and saw no one on the fence, and what did I do but roll right down on the ground, frightened almost to death. As I did so, it was come foot, help body, for I never stopped running until I got under the guns that were to fire the salute. Lafayette was the most famous man I had ever heard of, and you can imagine how I felt, a slave boy, to be favored with his recognition. That act burnt his image upon my heart, so that I never shall need a permit to recall it. I date my hatred of slavery from that day, and I tell you that after that, I allowed no moving thing on the face of the earth to stand between me and my freedom. After Lafayette's southern and western tours, he returned to Boston for the laying of the cornerstone of Bunker Hill Monument. In Daniel Webster's Bunker Hill address, his first Bunker Hill address, he gave a second one over a decade later when the monument was dedicated. He addressed Lafayette, who was seated in an armchair in front of the surviving veterans of the American Revolution. Heaven saw fit that the electric spark of liberty should be conducted by you from the New World to the Old, he said. Lafayette then made a second trip to New Hampshire, this time to the capital city of Concord. By the way, Benjamin Pierce did not have to diss his son's college graduation. He was the host of 200 veterans for a banquet on the State House lawn on June 22, 1825. In order to accomplish his goal of visiting all 24 states, Lafayette headed east to Maine on June 23rd, returning to Concord on the morning of the 27th, and then he left Concord at midday, heading west. After spending the night at Claremont, New Hampshire, he departed on the 28th of June in the early morning in a basket wagon belonging to Dr. Leonard Jarvis, one of the town fathers of Claremont. That slide is that wagon. It's in the Long Island Museum in Stony Brook. It used to be called the Long Island Museum of Art, History, and Carriages, but they're rebranding themselves, so now it's just the Long Island Museum. In any event, they traveled north along the Connecticut River to Cornish. There, New Hampshire relinquished its precious cargo to the authorities of Vermont, the 24th state that Lafayette visited, which he entered by crossing the bridge to Windsor. After Vermont, Lafayette traveled back to New York City for the July 4th celebrations. As he left New York on July 14th, a militia unit that had renamed itself National Guard in honor of Lafayette and his service in the Parisian National Guard during the French Revolution saw him off. Now, the next slide is a poster put out by the U.S. National Guard in 1989. They also commissioned a painting, and it shows Lafayette bidding farewell to this artillery militia unit, which is the predecessor to the 7th Regiment, which is, we still have the 7th Regiment Armory in Manhattan. And the arch says ferry to Hoboken. He was about to cross into New Jersey. But the legend on this poster tells that story and concludes that by the end of the 19th century, every state militia in the country had renamed itself National Guard in Lafayette's honor. So therefore, we have the New Hampshire National Guard, the Vermont National Guard, etc. Like Churchill in World War II, Lafayette lived in the White House in August and September of 1825. On September 7, 1825, President John Quincy Adams sent Lafayette off aboard a new frigate named the Brandywine in honor of Lafayette's service in the Battle of the Brandywine, where he was wounded, thus shedding his blood for America's cause. While in America, Lafayette was the first foreigner to address a joint session of Congress and was addressed by the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, who called him a faithful and fearless champion of liberty. Congress voted Lafayette a national reward for his services, which consisted of $200,000 in cash and 23 acres of land, a township in northern Florida. Lafayette was one of the earliest travelers on the Erie Canal in 1825 as he returned from the West to Boston. Lafayette died on May 20, 1834, and was buried in Pequot Cemetery in Paris. President Jackson gave him the same military honors as John Adams had ordered on Washington's death. America mourned. There were eulogies in churches and state legislatures and private societies. On December 31st, 1834, John Quincy Adams, now a congressman, gave Lafayette the official eulogy of the United States. So what was the significance of the Lafayette's farewell tour? First, Lafayette's arrival in the United States in August 1824 pacified the young country, which was in the midst of a vitriolic election campaign. The 5 candidates in the race included Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and Henry Clay. This was the first presidential election with not a single candidate being a member of the Revolutionary War generation. The November election was so close that it ended up being decided by the House of Representatives in February of 1825. Lafayette's mere presence led to a temporary truce, if not a complete cessation of electoral hostilities. According to Lafayette's private secretary, Auguste Levasseur, for 2 months, all hostilities as well as all the emotions excited by the election were forgotten, and one could only think anymore of Lafayette and the heroes of the revolution. There were two reasons for this. One was the sense of patriotism that Lafayette's presence inspired in Americans. The other was the news of Lafayette's visit crowded the rancorous political columns off the front pages of the nation's newspapers in many cases and provided a steady dose of favorable, even joyful alternative news. Second, Lafayette's 13-month visit restored a sense of pride and patriotism in a new generation on the cusp of the Jubilee year 1826. The welcoming speeches across the country dwelled on the improvements in commerce, agriculture, population growth, the arts, and education. In his replies, Lafayette spoke admiringly of the progress he observed throughout the nation. Americans attributed these successes to the Republic, which Lafayette had had a major role in founding. One New Hampshire Freemason, with some slight exaggeration, went so far as to exclaim, quote, "Whatever is lovely or exalted in the social and political conditions of America, we contemplate with enthusiasm as the monument of your virtues." Third, the farewell tour set off a naming frenzy, and I addressed that earlier in the speech. But in addition to what I said, 75 Masonic lodges were called Lafayette Lodges, and moreover, the name Lafayette was used. Babies that were born named their children, their parents named them Lafayette. One example I like to give is Supreme Court Justice Hugo L. Black of Alabama. His middle name was Lafayette. He was named after his father. Finally, the Lafayette tour solidified Lafayette's role as the go-to symbol of Franco-American friendship. Did you know that the inspirational spark for the Statue of Liberties was lit in the 1860s when Edward Laboulaye, the principal promoter of the enterprise, and Frederick Bartholdi, its sculptor, discussed how the Americans honored Lafayette and the French volunteers as much as they honored their own patriots? Did you know that the principal address at the 1886 inauguration of the statue, given by Peekskill, New York orator and later U.S. Senator Chauncey Depew, himself of French descent, was essentially a biography of Lafayette? Mr. Depew began his oration this day: "The story of Lafayette's life is the history of the time which made possible this statue, and his spirit is the very soul of this celebration." He continued, "The alliance with France during the American Revolution assured our triumph, and Lafayette assured our alliance." Even in modern times, during every state visit of a French president, Lafayette and his role in the American Revolution are referenced in speeches and in toasts. When President Sarkozy came in 2007, he spoke in the chamber of the House of Representatives, and he said, "I stand under the common gaze of Washington and Lafayette." There are two portraits in the chamber, one of Washington and one a gift of the artist Harry Scheffer in 1824 of Lafayette. In 2018, when President Macron visited, Lafayette was mentioned a total of 21 times in the various speeches and toasts. So he's always present whenever there's France and America cooperate. I will end this talk with an obituary, not of Lafayette, but of an obscure Philadelphian by the name of David Kramer. Kramer died in Philadelphia during the blizzard of 1888. The obituary, in all caps, begins, "A man who knew Lafayette dead." David Kramer died on Monday evening, the 12th, after several months' illness of a complication of diseases in the 73rd year of his age. So he didn't die because of the blizzard. He, many years ago, resided in Philadelphia, where he was a contractor and erected many fancy buildings for the leading men of the city. He was a member of the FO and AM, the Freemasons, Carpenters Association, a high-end guild in Philadelphia, and the IOOF, the Oddfellows, and at one time was an active member of the city council. In his youth, he had the pleasure of seeing and conversing with General Lafayette during his last visit to America. Well, if you do the math, David Kramer, a successful builder, joiner of organizations, and city councilor, was 9 years old when he, along with 5,000 other school children, the newspaper accounts say 70 schools sent 70 children each, met General Lafayette outside Independence Hall on October 4, 1824, and that was apparently the most important event of his long and useful life. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Okay. Thank you Alan. Thank you very much. That's all of it is quite a journey. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Peter. And Peter, I'll let you share your slides and take it from there.
Great, thank you. As Alan noted, the tour took shape. It wasn't all planned out in advance, but as it took shape and turned into a plan, there were two very important events that were driving it. One was he had to be in Boston on June 17th of 1825 in order to dedicate the Bunker Hill Monument. And the other was that he had to visit all 24 states. So that accounts for Vermont being the last state. He was doing the West, and he comes up he rushes back to Boston, and he still has to tick off Maine and Vermont. From Vermont, he'll take a boat back to New York. The event makes a huge impression, in some ways more so in the smaller towns than in the big cities. In many of them, it's the biggest thing that happened in that town in the 19th century. An example of that we can get from Jacob Collamer, who greeted Lafayette in Royalston, Vermont. And this will also give you a sense of how the speeches went. It has the key content of most of the speeches. We know no way of rendering this welcome more acceptable to our nation's guest and by assuring you that every little town and village, however remote and obscure in the mountains which environ it, is happy in the care and protection of our government, in the full enjoyment in common with our splendid cities of all these privileges and blessings which flow from the liberality of our Republican institutions, and surrounded with the light and intelligence which attend those institutions, we cannot be insensible whence those blessings flow, of the debt of gratitude which they imply. These are the happy results of your early labors and those of your compatriots. Hence the thrill of pleasure which at your condescending visit vibrates with electric rapidity and sympathetic arising. Now, to show how memorable this is, Collamer's young daughter, Harriet, saw Lafayette that day. Later in life, Mrs. Henry Collamer Johnson wrote, "Of all the pictures that hang on memory's walls, none is more vivid to me than the scene of Lafayette's visit to my native village. I stood holding my mother's hand in the front door of my old homestead and saw a carriage drawn by 6 white horses with a venerable gentleman bowing right and left to the crowd." Now, it'd be to have a little more context, we want to think about what would somebody in Vermont who kept up with the news might have been reading about in the paper in the first couple of weeks of June when awaiting Lafayette's visit. And there's a story that James Rogers from New York was executed in Pernambuco in Brazil after failing to get a pardon from Emperor Pedro. In another note, we learned that the Portuguese government has consented to recognize the independence of Brazil. Then there are letters from Mr. Miller, who is pretty clearly Jonathan Peckham Miller, a Vermonter who had gone to help the Greeks win their freedom from the Ottoman Empire. Actually, Lord Byron had died in Greece the previous year. That was a big draw for people. He had high praise for the tenacity of all the Greek people, including women and children. He also advised Americans not to come to Greece without the means to support themselves. Peckham Miller would return to Vermont, and he'd be very active in the Underground Railroad, and as an abolitionist. And as you can see, he died in 1847, so he didn't get to see it through. Then there are several stories about the troubles of the Creek Indians in Georgia. One of the chiefs, referred to as Mintosh, was killed by other chiefs for signing a land cession treaty they viewed as unauthorized. This is kind of the beginning of the Trail of Tears you'll see during the Jackson administration. There are reports about the British conquest of Burma. One report noting, but Burman, like all states and empires in India, which had been invaded by the British arms, appeared doomed to be added to the already enormous domain of the British Company of India. The Emperor of China ordered a new wall to be erected between the region and the Burman Empire to prevent the uncivilized Burmese and British from entering the Celestial Empire. And then there's the news that they've been following for close to a year about the progress of Lafayette. We get to read that on the Ohio River, 150 miles below Louisville, the mechanic ran foul of a snag and sunk in about 15 minutes. The general has lost all his papers and baggage, together with his private carriage. Interesting thing about during the tour, Lafayette had been born a Marquis. At some point, he renounced that. He said, we shouldn't have inherited titles. So he wanted to be referred to as the general. And you'll find in the accounts and the speeches that's pretty well followed. Now, to understand the full context of Lafayette's life, you'd have to have this vast knowledge of American, general European, and French history that's certainly beyond me. But the way I would sum it up is Lafayette is close, or as close as you could possibly get, to being universally popular in the United States. In Europe, not so much. Here's an example of somebody who did not like Lafayette at all. Clemens von Metternich. He was going to make the world safe for absolute monarchy. And his diary entry on May 28th, 1834, a few days after Lafayette died, was, "Lafayette is dead. Too late for the world. I am disgusted to see the Moniteur pronouncing a eulogy over him." Von Metternich referred to the Monroe Doctrine as an indecent declaration. Well-informed Americans would be aware of the perilous state of government of the people in the world. But as Sarah Vowell wrote, more than anyone on earth, Lafayette was mournfully aware of the uniqueness of the American Republic. Now, the image that people might have had in mind was of the young, dashing Marquis, 19 years old, becoming a major general. That's not what they got. The general would be in civilian clothes, quite a bit older and stouter. He walked with a limp. Of course, he was wounded in the leg at Brandywine, but that wasn't why he limped. It was from falling on the ice in Paris after he went back. Now, we Lafayette enthusiasts are fond of the rock star metaphor for Lafayette, and it is a good metaphor in that it expresses the enthusiasm with which Lafayette was met, but there are two problems with the rock star metaphor. The first is that when Lafayette arrives, he does not put on a show for the community. The community puts on a show for Lafayette. They want to show Lafayette what a great country, what a great community, how these institutions have created such great stuff, and they're thanking him for him. After the big speech from the most eminent person available, he would say a few words of thanks, very modest, shook hands and reminisced with the veterans whom he invariably remembered, kissed the ladies on the hand, and told the militia that he had not seen finer troops anywhere. The second problem with the rock star metaphor is that it's inadequate. Here's the speech by Cornelius Van Ness, the governor of Vermont, in Windsor. He met Lafayette at the border as he crossed, and gave a speech, and then he was with Lafayette for the entire tour in Vermont, which is all of 2 days. Permit me to tender you the congratulations and hospitalities of the people of this state on your arrival within its borders. In the performance of this welcome duty, sir, the first and most pleasing points which present themselves are the character and occurrences which have distinguished and adorned your life, your public and your private virtues, your exalted and inflexible patriotism, your ardent and uniform devotion to the great cause of liberty, and above all, as it regards your noble zeal, your disinterested sacrifice, and your eminent services in the memorable struggle which resulted in the establishment of the independence of these United States. But to dwell minutely on these would be a repetition of what has been 1,000 times said and published. This is Vermont. It's the end of the tour. Van Ness and his minions have access to most of the speeches that were given because they were all published in the newspaper. So they're not going to go through all the minute details, which the other speeches did. Our tongues have been forestalled. Our hearts are not less the full. They have indeed been constantly and tenderly alive to all your movements. And whatever concerned you while traversing the Union, but it has been restricted to an hour in which our own soil has been hallowed by your tread, for them to pour out without measure the libations of their gratitude and their affection, that these are now rushing forth from their overflowing fountains in torrents behind whose rapidity any language of mine can but lag, is sufficiently seen in the intense and adoring gaze of the crowd by which you are surrounded. Lafayette was not a rock star to these people. He was a superhero. I actually can elaborate on this. I'm gonna have to go quickly. But like every superhero, he has an origin story. I'm not going to try any of the French pronunciations. I'm terrible at them. So this is where he is born. It's kind of Smallville. It's way out in the boonies. He's born in 1757. Of a family of sword nobles who've been fighting and dying for France, going back to Joan of Arc. His father dies in the Battle of Minden in 1759. His mother leaves him with his aunts and with his grandmother, his paternal grandmother and some aunts, to be raised out in Smallville. and she goes to Paris, metropolis, to pave his way. Lafayette is always driven by a desire from his early youth to live a glorious life. There's this terrible creature that's haunting the area, the Beast of Govardhan, and he goes out hunting for it as a young kid. It was a real thing. Somebody eventually killed it. They never quite figured out what it was. That's what happened. You know, that's him. He's the little lord of the manor. He's really kind of happy there. Everybody tips their hats to him. But then his mother says, "Hey, it's time to come to Paris, and you have to, start finding your way." He still wants active military duty. He doesn't fit in well. He can't dance very well. He's not doing well with all this aristocratic stuff. But then in 1770, he gets his first superpower. His mother and his maternal great grandfather die within a month of one another, and now he is one of the wealthiest aristocrats in France, or in Europe, actually, and the hottest commodity on the marriage market. So the Noël's family becomes interested in him. That's his mother-in-law. You'll see she dies in 1794. She's a victim of the terror along with her sister and some other relatives. Adrienne, who ends up being Lafayette's wife, is spared. But Lafayette now has his second superpower, which is influential. So when he decides to go to America because he's excited about all these new things, he's able to do that because he's rich. He can buy his own ship and bring a dozen people with him to the United States, where he meets with the common problem of a lot of officers who went there. The Americans can't pay anybody, and they're skeptical. And that's where his second superpower comes from. He's extremely influential, at least potentially, because of the Noël's family, and also his high school buddies, guys he associated with when he was a teenager, include Louis the 16th, Louis the 18th, Charles the 10th, and they'll all regret knowing him. So Lafayette gets the rank at 19, gets the rank of Major General, is introduced to Washington, and they form a fast bond. I'm going to move quickly because we're short in time. France ends up having a treaty with the United States and supporting it. And the penultimate victory of the United States is at Yorktown in 1781. The war won't be formally over for a couple of years, but it's pretty well sealed. And that's largely due to the French fleet and French troops. But Lafayette is there commanding an American division, and which plays a critical role in the Yorktown victory. That's it. That's why Americans see Lafayette as a superhero. I have a lot more slides and a lot more to talk about, but I'm gonna leave it at there because of our time, if that's okay.
If any of you have questions or comments to either Alan or Peter, or thoughts along the way, you put them in the chat. There are a couple in there. Alan and Peter, can you see the chat in there?
Sure.
And if you, okay, what about a family story? Saw Lafayette at a ball in May 1825. Is this possible?
I think he was in Maysville, so it's possible. May
Okay.
1825. May
Yeah.
25th. Let me just check.
Yeah. And then, Peter, do you want to respond to the one about?
Yeah. The route was definitely worked out. I mean, whether it was personally by the governor, there was always these constraints. And I'm sorry I can't tick off the towns, but he basically he comes into Windsor and he's escorted by militia all the way through. He's traveling. The equivalent of a private jet, which is a coach where horses are changed regularly. So some of the places he stops is just because they got to change horses, but the people will notice it. He goes from Windsor up to Montpelier and then across to Burlington, where he'll get on a boat to go down to New York to go off. The finale of in 2025 will be a cruise on the Spirit of Ethan Allen at 6:30 on Saturday the 29th, which people will be able to sign up for. So.
Okay, yeah, there's speaking of Burlington, somebody there, can you speak to his time in Burlington?
Yeah, it's great. The most significant thing that he does is he lays a cornerstone for an extension or a replacement of one of the buildings of the University of Vermont. There's a lot of greetings and dinners and a lot of speeches. A significant amount of that's going to be recreated on the 29th, which luckily is we're very lucky in Vermont that it's the 28th and 29th is a weekend, and there's going to be he'll be in Winooski at the there's a French themed festival there. He'll be there. He'll be there for a couple of hours. The Masons are sponsoring him doing the cornerstone laying, and the university may be doing some more. So there'll be a lot of events in Burlington on the 29th.
Okay, great. Yeah. Local lore has it that the carriage rode up Mount Scotney Windsor was created for his tour.
Yeah, that was a big disappointment because he came a day later than he was expected, or he came sometime after he was expected, so that and he was on a tighter schedule, so they didn't he wasn't able to go up and do that. I read the story though about all the guys coming out and chopping down the trees. I forget the source on that, but there's confirmation of that, but then they weren't able to follow through on it when he was there.
Yeah. I have a question, and that is, I assume through all this that Lafayette was completely bilingual in French and English.
By that time he was, I think, because he had to learn English coming across on the Victory when he first came there. I think his English wasn't that great in 1777 when he arrived, but then he's hanging out. He was during the Revolution. He's an American officer. He's an American major general commanding American troops on Washington's staff. So I think that would have gotten him pretty fluent.
So may I comment, Eric?
Yeah.
This is Alan. So he did not know English when he left aboard the Victoire, which is the ship, in 1777. But he had three advantages. One is that he had a classical education, and Latin was his best subject, and of course all the Latin roots, and French too, because French there are a lot of roots. Secondly, his cohort and mentor at the time was the Baron de Kalb, who'd spent several years as a French spy in America and was fluent in English. He was aboard the ship. And thirdly, he brought with him a primer, an English primer, which is still owned by Lagrange Foundation, the Chambron Foundation, it's called. And it was on exhibit in the New York Historical Society. And I guess he was a quick study because he's writing letters to Washington and others, within months of his arrival. And it's sort of broken English. And of course, over time, it got better and better.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. 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 Somebody actually, you can share links to events in New Hampshire and Vermont.
Right. If you we're getting to the point where the events are well enough formed that Lafayette200.org will have the events. There's a tab in it, events, and that's being filled in the next week or two. There's this back and forth of, well, what exactly you're going to do and figuring out. We've got the timeline figured out anyway. So
okay.
You can just keep checking Lafayette200.org.
I might add, you should also check friendsoflafayette.org because there's a calendar there and they get posted, I think, simultaneously to the two websites.
Okay.
Speaking of that, Peter and I are both here on behalf of the American Friends of Lafayette. We were founded in 1932. We now have 1,500 members in most of the states. And there's a question, is there anything taking place at Lafayette's tomb? Every year, the American Friends of Lafayette is one of a few organizations that is allowed to lay a wreath at Lafayette's tomb in the July 4th celebration. There will be such a ceremony. It's not clear in the last few years whether it's actually going to take place on July 4th. But as soon as we get confirmation of the date, again, we will put it on our two websites. There's Peter. Someone has a slide. Is that you, Peter?
Yeah.
That's Lafayette.
Thought I'd show that one to everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
The American Embassy has gotten very lazy in the last few years. They don't want to, if it's on a weekend, for example, I don't think they do it if July 4th is on a weekend. So we've been at their mercy as to the actual day.
That American flag stayed there. An American flag stayed there during the occupation. So it's a strong tradition.
Okay. Okay. Somebody comment that the Champlain Canal was officially opened in 1823. Not until then did Burlington grow into a significant port to the outside world. So it must have, from my understanding, it must have grown rather rapidly. Any comments? Yeah.
Well, the only thing I knew was I don't remember the name of the ship was that Lafayette got on a ship on Lake Champlain to go to a town in New York.
Yeah, it's the name of the ship is the Phoenix, Phoenix,
Yeah.
and they went directly to Whitehall, New York, actually.
Thank you both very, very much. Thank you very much for all you've done through Friends of Lafayette and here in Vermont and the 200th anniversary. And thank you for being willing to spend an hour or so talking to us. And as I mentioned before we started, about 2/3 of the people who signed up for this talk today are not members of the Alliance, a much broader audience, and which is all to the better. So thank you very much. And there are thank yous showing up in the chat, and my thank you as well on behalf of the Alliance Française here in Burlington, and my own personal education through all of this.
Somebody asked to post the website. If you want me to do that, I can.
Yeah, somebody just put Lafayette200.org up in the chat.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
Great.
And the other one would be friendsoflafayette.org, if I remember correctly.
Yes, friends, all one word.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, thank you, and have a good day, and good luck with all the events to come.
Thank you, sir.
Through the summer.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Take care.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.